When a lady soldier's mother was insulted by an IPS officer, what happened next shocked everyone, a lesson to remember. By 7:30 on a chilly November Saturday, the Springfield, Illinois farmers' market had already reached a pleasant hum. Canvas tents lined both sides of Monroe Street, strings of warm bulbs still glowing against a gray sky that hadn't quite decided whether to clear or drizzle. The courthouse clock chimed the half-hour. A barista at a pop-up cart hissed steam into paper cups. A bluegrass duo tuned a mandolin beside crates of collards and late apples. Strollers squeaked over patchy asphalt. A kid in a puffer jacket hopped between chalk squares. The whole scene felt like a postcard of small-town America breathing in and out. At the center of it all, Martha Miller stood very still, as if staying motionless might keep her hunger from noticing her body. 72, 5 feet nothing, a bird-boned woman wrapped in a beige coat gone threadbare at the cuffs. She'd pinned the coat with a safety pin that kept slipping. The pin glinted every time she shifted. Her sneakers were the kind you get from a church pantry, a size too big and tied with mismatched laces. She clutched a faded cloth tote like it might float her through the morning. "Morning, ma'am," said Ethan Brooks, the fruit guy, bright-eyed and red-cheeked from unloading boxes. 22, community college nights, farmers' market Saturdays, decent tips when he smiled, which he did often. He'd laid out Honeycrisp apples into fan pyramids and tucked bananas in a yellowed crescent near the cash box. Martha tried to smile back. Her mouth trembled first. "Sweetheart," she said, her voice thin, careful. "Could I just have one banana? I haven't eaten since yesterday." Ethan glanced over his shoulder, as if kindness required a witness. The vendor to his left, a florist named Mrs. Nguyen, was busy wrapping sunflowers in brown paper. The coffee guy was taking 3 orders at once. No one was looking. That felt like permission. "Of course," Ethan said, reaching. "Here, take 2. He had one half peeled from the bunch when a voice sliced the air clean in 2. "What's happening over here?" The crowd's sound seemed to drop a notch, like someone had put a hand over the speaker. The voice had that effect. Deputy Chief Patrick O'Donnell, square chin, regulation haircut iron gray at the temples, stepped out from behind a pyramid of pumpkins with 2 uniformed patrol officers trailing him. His boots were mirror-shined, his winter jacket fit like armor, his baton hung easy from his belt, like a promise he wouldn't need to say twice. Ethan's shoulders rose instinctively. Martha's fingers tightened on the cloth tote. O'Donnell scanned the stand, cash box, fruit, the old woman, the half-severed stems on the banana bunch, then fixed on Ethan. "You got a theft here, son?" Ethan swallowed. "No, sir, She asked? Martha whispered, as if speaking too loud might get her in trouble with the weather. "I'm hungry is all." "Everyone's got a story," O'Donnell said, the words flat, practiced. He turned fully to Martha. "You can't just take. This is a business. There are rules." "I didn't take," Martha said. "I asked?" "I haven't had breakfast." She tried to laugh, to make it small, to make it pass. "Haven't had dinner either." "Ma'am," O'Donnell said, and there was no ma'am in it. "The market has clear ordinances. Vendors have been complaining all season about asking turning into taking. You step out of line, I set you back." He reached for her wrist. Ethan instinctively stepped between them. "Sir, it's fine. I offered. I can comp a banana. It's 50 cents. O'Donnell's eyes flicked to Ethan with annoyed patience, the look a coach gives a freshman who still thinks hustle is the same as authority. "You're not doing her any favors," he said. "You normalize disorder, you invite it." He brushed Ethan aside with a forearm and caught Martha by the sleeve. The safety pin popped. The coat gaped across a blouse with frayed buttons. Several shoppers had paused now. A woman with a stroller, a butcher with a cleaver tattoo, a high schooler in a Letterman jacket, Rosa Delgado from the bakery stall with flour streaked on her cheek. Attention gathered, but nobody stepped in. The sound of the steam wand at the coffee cart hissed like a kettle warning the room. "I'm asking you to let go," Martha said, very soft. Her eyes were cloudy but steady. "Please." "Stand up straight," O'Donnell said, as if posture were a law. He tugged her forward. Her sneaker toes snagged a warped board beneath the tent. She pitched sideways into a wooden apple crate. The edge caught her just above her eyebrow with a crack dull as a thumb on a melon. The market stopped. One crimson thread ran down Martha's temple, got briefly lost in the gray wisps of hair, then found her cheek and kept going. A pair of Honeycrisps skittered loose and rolled under the table skirt. Someone, no one could say who, gasped. Someone else swore low. A child asked too loud, "Mom, why did the police push Grandma?" and was shushed with a palm. Ethan felt his stomach tip, the way it does in an elevator that doesn't stop where you expect. He moved to help Martha up. "Leave her," O'Donnell snapped. "We're not done." Ethan froze. He could hear his own breath scrape in his throat. He could hear Rosa whisper, "Adios," like a prayer she hadn't planned to say. He could hear how quiet everyone else was being. Martha blinked. Blood pattered onto the pitted asphalt and soft, hink-hink hinges of sound. She pressed her palm to the cut and looked down at the red there as if it were something she owed the ground. "Please," she said again, and it wasn't clear if she was talking to O'Donnell, or to her knee, or to the morning itself. "I didn't take anything. I just asked?" O'Donnell set his jaw. "Stop saying just. You people always say just. The law doesn't care about your qualifiers." He stood over her as if height were proof. Ethan's phone was in his back pocket. He felt it like heat. He thought of his mom, who cleaned offices at night and always said, "If it isn't recorded, it didn't happen to people like us." He thought of the way the deputy chief's voice had sliced the morning. He thought of the blood traveling a path down a stranger's face, of everybody looking but not seeing. He pulled out the phone. His thumb hovered. Once he pressed the red circle, there'd be no taking it back, no pretending he'd missed it, no shrugging, no later saying, "I didn't know." His hand shook. He pressed record. The screen framed Martha on the ground, the crate half collapsed beside her, apples like punctured moons around her knees. It framed O'Donnell's boots squared to her ribs, his baton angled in its loop. It framed Ethan's sneakers at the edge of the scene, the line he hadn't crossed yet. "Sir?" Ethan said, his voice on the audio thin but there. "She didn't steal. I offered it to her." "Put the phone away," O'Donnell said, without even turning to look. "This is police business." From somewhere behind Ethan, near the flower stall, Mr. Nguyen said, "Deputy, she comes every week. She sits. She never bothers anyone." The sentence hung in the air like a fragile ornament. O'Donnell didn't reach for it. "Anyone else?" he asked, not really asking. Heads dropped. The bluegrass duo silently set their instruments down. The coffee line shuffled in place. Two tourists in matching fleece pulled their beanies lower and stepped back. O'Donnell reached for Martha's elbow again, not gentler this time. "On your feet." Martha's body tried to obey. Bodies learn compliance long before minds do. But her leg went out, the hinge of the knee buckling, a wince cutting through her lips. She slumped again, the crate groaned. Blood made a sheet now across her eyebrow, dripped onto the apple skin where it beaded, glossy and obscene. Ethan heard his own voice on the recording say, "Stop. Please." He surprised himself saying it out loud, not just thinking it loud. "You're hurting her." O'Donnell finally looked at him, truly looked, the way men look right before they decide whether to swat a mosquito or ignore it. "Son," he said, "do you want to be part of the solution or the problem?" Ethan's mouth opened and closed. He thought of the market manager who liked him, of the city permit that could be pulled without notice, of how small his margins were and how close his rent was, of his mother's second shift, of the way power could speak and make everyone else's words mere weather. He thought of all of that and of the blood, and the calculation refused to total. "I want you to stop," he said. Quiet. Steady. Recorded. The high schooler in the Letterman jacket shifted. The stroller mom adjusted her grip. Rosa slid a napkin dispenser down her counter with the slow gravity of a decision she might yet take back. Little movements, all of them, like the first tremors before something loosens. Last warning, O'Donnell said to Ethan. Phone away. Now. Ethan's thumb hovered near the screen again, not to stop recording but to steady his hand. He felt the weight of the moment settle into his bones, catalogued by the camera's eye, the hum of the bulbs, the chalk dust, the barn-red pumpkins, the deputy chief's badge catching a clouded light, the tiny click of blood finding asphalt. The kind of details juries remember. The kind of details hearts try not to. Martha lifted her head just enough to look past O'Donnell's knee at Ethan. For a fraction she seemed to see him and not the uniform, or the world behind it. Her lips shaped something that could have been, "Thank you," or "I'm sorry," or "Please," or all three. Ethan kept the phone up. A siren pealed somewhere far off on Monroe, faint as a rumor. The courthouse clock marked another minute. O'Donnell's jaw worked, a muscle ticking near his ear. Around them, the market held its breath so hard that even the bulbs seemed to dim. Truth was now a red dot glowing in Ethan's palm. Whatever happened next would happen inside its circle. The siren that had sounded like a rumor a block away turned into a strobe of light and sound bending around the courthouse. An AMR ambulance nosed up to the curb, and two EMTs, one young and freckled, one middle-aged with a salt and pepper beard, stepped out into the hell breath of the market. The older one, Tom Greer, knelt beside Martha Miller without asking permission from anyone, not even the uniform whose boots were squared to her ribs. "Ma'am, I'm Tom. Can you hear me?" He peeled on blue gloves. "We're gonna help you." Martha blinked slowly, as if waking from a dream she wouldn't recommend. Blood slicked her temple and matted her gray bangs. Tom palpated gently along the cut. His partner, Kayla Rhodes, cracked open a trauma kit and handed over gauze, a butterfly strip, then a pressure bandage. The splotches on the pavement darkened, then stopped beating as the compress set. Martha flinched but didn't complain. "BP 90/60, Kayla said after a squeeze of the cuff. "Pulse steady. She needs fluids." Tom looked up at Deputy Chief Patrick O'Donnell. "We're transporting." O'Donnell's jaw worked. He gave the sort of nod that tries to make consent look like command. "Do it. And keep it quiet." He jerked his chin at two patrol officers behind him. "Pike, Rees, clear a path. No crowds. No pictures." He said it loud enough that the command became the point. Phones, some already raised, some guilty in pockets, tilted toward the ground. Ethan Brooks didn't lower his. His red recording dot still burned. O'Donnell's gaze dragged across it and kept going. The ambulance had given him a different audience to dominate. From somewhere near the bakery stall, a small voice cracked the silence. "Somebody call 911! A boy in a puffy camo jacket, Mason, 7 maybe, was white-knuckled on his dad's hand, eyes huge. The man, a custodian from the courthouse named Stan Harris, already had his phone to his ear. "I did, buddy," he whispered. "They're here." As Kayla started a line and hung a saline bag on a portable hook, Tom asked the questions that anchor a life to paper. "Name?" "Martha," she breathed. "Last name?" "Miller." "Are you on any meds, Martha?" She started to say, no, but her mouth shaped something else instead, two syllables that weren't an answer to him at all. Virginia." Barely more than an exhale. Kayla glanced at Tom. Tom kept working. They heard it. So did a woman at the flower stall, who glanced up at the same time Rosa Delgado at the bakery did, the name catching on both their faces. "Let's move," Tom said. He and Kayla lifted in practice motion, slid the board, raised the stretcher's legs with that clever scissor clack. The crowd parted in a hush. Even the bluegrass players watched with their picks pressed flat against their thumbs. "Where are you taking her?" Ethan asked, still filming despite the tremor in his hand. "St. Catherine Memorial," Kayla said, already stepping. "Trauma Bay." O'Donnell planted himself again. "Market's open," he barked to no one and everyone. "Nothing to see." He scanned the perimeter like a man trying to restitch a tear with his glare. "If you've got a complaint," he added, pinning Ethan with that weary predator's patience, There's a form at the station. Ethan didn't answer. He tracked the stretcher to the ambulance doors and, only when they shut and the siren rose again, lowered his phone. For a long second he watched his own reflection ghosted on the black screen, his pale face, his two wide eyes, then his thumb tapped the triangle. He scrubbed back and watched it again, end to end, the shove, the crack, the blood, the command, the quiet. His conscience, arranged into pixels and sound, didn't blink. At first he sent the clip to a private group, Monroe Street Merchants, a ragtag band of stall owners and food truck operators who swapped tips and complained about parking tickets. "What do I do with this?" he typed, then deleted it and wrote, "This happened at my stand. Please watch." The gray dots blinked. Replies came like hail. "Oh my God, Ethan. Post it. Don't. They'll come for you. We can't keep being quiet." He didn't know which voice was courage and which was fear until his thumb chose for him. He opened Facebook. Caption box. The words came clearer than his hands felt steady. "This is Martha. She asked for a banana. She was pushed and bled on our street. We were quiet. I'm done being quiet." He added hashtag justice for Martha before he could second-guess the melodrama of a hashtag and hit post. Within 5 minutes, 32 shares. 10. 50. The number climbed in little leaps. A local page, Springfield Watch, ripped it and pushed it to 30,000 followers with a red siren emoji. A reporter from Whisper 7 DM'd him, "Can we call you?" Someone tagged at City of Springfield. Someone else tagged at Springfield PD and at Patrick O'Donnell, who didn't even have Twitter. The video jumped platforms the way fire jumps gaps when the wind is right. On X, it picked up a second hashtag, hashtag not on our streets. On Instagram, a bakery regular reposted it with a shaky selfie. "That's my market. That's our neighbor." By noon, strangers were arguing in the comments like they knew each other's hearts. The thing about a video is that it doesn't ask permission before it takes up space inside people. Across the state in Chicago, in a 5th-floor walk-up above a coffee roastery, Special Agent Ava Hart of the FBI's Chicago field office was trying to make eggs stick to a skillet that had lost the war with nonstick years ago. Her phone buzzed on the counter with the particular insistence of a text from Liam Cortez, an investigative reporter she'd befriended back when a fraud case overlapped with his beat. "Can't shake the feeling this is for you," he wrote, and dropped a link. She thumbed it open, annoyance first. Saturday, for God's sake, then sound and light filled the little kitchen. The market. The old woman. The shove. The crack. The blood. The deputy's boots. The green and white tents like praying hands in the wind. She didn't breathe for the first 15 seconds. On the 22nd, the half-cooked eggs hit the floor with a wet slap because her hand wasn't holding the skillet anymore. On the 30th, she paused the frame, right there, the moment the old woman lifted her head in a kind of stubborn dignity that had no business sharing space with humiliation. Martha. She didn't know the name yet, but her bones did something that bones do when an old story gets pulled into the present. Ava walked to the bookshelf and pulled down a small tin from behind a row of paperbacks. Inside, a cheap gold locket shaped like a pressed leaf, the hinge a little crooked. She'd been 8 when a caseworker at St. Bridget's shelter had handed it to her with a note. "Your mother left this. We don't know why she couldn't stay. We don't know her name." The photo inside had been black and white, faded toward gray, an exhausted young woman in a thrift store blouse cradling a baby with ridiculous cheeks. The woman's eyes had a tilt to them, a tenderness bright even through the grain. Ava opened the locket now and held it next to the frozen video on her phone. Eyebrow line. Cheekbone. The mouth's left corner where it tipped a little higher than the right. 30-plus years apart, and a bad camera on both ends, and still, the features rhymed. "No," she said to the empty room, not as denial but as astonishment. The locket trembled between her fingers. Her eyes burned in a way that had nothing to do with the onions she hadn't chopped. Her phone buzzed again. A second link from Liam. EMTs took her to St. Catherine Memorial. Police already spinning. Heard your deputy chief's been untouchable for years. You okay? Ava stared at the screen until her reflection stopped double exposing with the paused image. Then she moved, grabbed jeans, boots, jacket, badge, slid her Glock into the safe and shut it, made 3 calls while the coffee machine exhaled like a tired animal. One to ASAC Ritchie to say she needed to be in Springfield on personal business, and might also have a duty to report situation depending on what she found. One to Detective Carla Main at Springfield PD, a graduate school friend she hadn't traded more than Christmas emojis with in 2 years. One to her ride-or-die touring Gwyn to feed the cat. On I-55 South, the winter clouds flattened into a steel bar. Ava drove with the locket on a chain under her shirt, the edge cool against her sternum like a coin you refused to spend. Back in Springfield, the ambulance doors burst into the fluorescent hush of St. Catherine Memorial ZD. GCS 14, head laceration, hypotensive, Kayla called as they rolled. A trauma nurse with calm eyes and a pen tucked behind one ear, Rebecca Kim, RN, fell into step, glancing from monitor to patient to tech and back again. Labs, 2 large-bore IVs, type and screen, she said. We'll get CT as soon as she's hemodynamically stable. Martha's lips moved again while Rebecca tightened the band around her arm. The sound was barely there, but Rebecca leaned close because sometimes the thing a person says first is the thing that saves them later. VA, Martha breathed. Rebecca blinked. It wasn't a med, it wasn't an allergy, it wasn't a date of birth. It was a name heavy with a question. Rebecca wrote on the clipboard anyway, in the box where it said emergency contact. Possible daughter Ava? It was a nurse's note, not an affidavit. In a lull between orders, curiosity, a muscle healthcare worker's train and mistrust in equal measure, tugged at her. She stepped into the charting alcove, opened her phone, and typed, Ava Hart Springfield. Nothing. Ava Hart FBI. The first hit was a clipped headshot in bureau blue, jaw set, eyes direct. A second hit, a 5-year-old profile in the Tribune about a foster kid turned fed who worked white-collar cases like they were personal. Rebecca chewed her lip a second, then typed and erased 3 drafts of a message before letting the simplest survive. Agent Hart, this is Rebecca Kim, RN at St. Catherine Memorial in Springfield. We have an unidentified older female assaulted at the farmer's market. She has whispered the name Ava repeatedly. If this means anything to you, please call the ED back line. I will keep this discreet. She hit send and put the phone face down so she wouldn't watch hope turn into mistake. By early afternoon, the waiting area outside the ED had swollen with the human weather that follows a viral clip. Reporters with camera bags slung like satchels, bloggers with ring lights, regular people in heavy coats, who felt like their presence might tilt a scale. Whisper 7 set up a tripod near the vending machines. Springfield Watch went live on Facebook with a shaky monologue that began. We don't do this, but today is different. Security posted a rope line and apologized every 5 minutes, which is the minimum apology required to keep people from thinking they're being treated like cattle. On the other side of town, the market's bustle had found its voice again, but it was a different octave, low, wary, contrite. At the fruit stand, Ethan stood behind a half-toppled pyramid of apples he hadn't yet found the energy to rebuild. The red dot on his phone screen was off now, but the world it had summoned kept pulsing. He scrolled without seeing until a DM from a name he didn't recognize landed like a tap on the shoulder. I'm on my way to the hospital. If you're the one who filmed, thank you. H. At Springfield PD, O'Donnell shut his office door with the slow emphasis of a man creating his own silence. He stared at the monitor on his desk as if he could intimidate pixels. Internally, a statement was being drafted that used phrases like ongoing review and context of enforcement. Externally, his officers were texting their spouses about dinner plans as if the center could still hold. And on the interstate, Ava drove through flat fields where corn stalks stood like stiff phrases in a language winter speaks. Her phone vibrated on the passenger seat, Rebecca Kim replying with a room number, a gate to use, a warning that media had sniffed the story already. Ava touched the locket through her shirt, felt the hinge, the slight scratch where it had once caught on a sweater, and said aloud, to no one but the road, I'm coming. In the ED, Rebecca checked Martha's vitals again, smoothed a wrinkle from the blanket, and because she was the sort of nurse who talked to patients even when they were sleeping, added softly, "Whoever Ava is, I hope she's worth the way you say her name." Martha exhaled, something like peace threaded into the sound. The monitor beeped on. Outside, the camera lights brightened. Inside, a story older than any hashtag kept finding its way to breath. By the time Ava Hart pulled into the parking structure of St. Catherine Memorial Hospital, the gray sky had sunk lower, heavy as wet wool. She flashed her bureau credentials at security, who hesitated only a second before waving her through the roped-off entrance. Outside the main doors, camera crews jostled with boom mics and ring lights, their breath rising like smoke in the cold air. Homemade posters bobbed above the crowd. "Justice for Martha. Hungry is not equal to criminal. Our mothers deserve better." The chant hadn't started yet, but the air felt pregnant with it. Inside, the atmosphere shifted from loud chaos to tense, antiseptic quiet. Nurses moved briskly down pale green halls, clipboards tucked to their chests, sneakers squeaking on linoleum. Orderlies pushed carts stacked with 4 bags and bandage rolls. A faint tang of antiseptic and burned coffee lingered. The emergency wing was full, but room 14 had been cordoned off. A uniformed hospital guard leaned against the wall outside, arms crossed, scanning badges like a bouncer at a nightclub. "Agent Hart?" he asked when she approached. His voice carried the polite stiffness of someone briefed to expect her. "That's me." Ava clipped her badge back to her belt. "Rebecca Kim called." The guard tapped his radio. "She's here." A moment later, Rebecca Kim, ponytail frayed from a long shift, emerged from the room. Her eyes were tired but steady. "Agent Hart?" "Yes." Rebecca exhaled as if confirming something she'd barely allowed herself to hope. "She's inside. Stable for now. CT showed no intracranial bleed, just a nasty laceration, a mild concussion, low blood pressure from shock. But she's been whispering one word over and over." Ava already knew, but her throat tightened anyway. "Ava." Rebecca nodded. "Yes. That. She said it before we had her charted, before we asked her anything." She lowered her voice. "She looks at me sometimes like she's waiting for someone to walk through the door." Ava glanced past her toward the narrow window. She could see the shadow of a frail body under white blankets, on 4-pole, the beep of a monitor. For one suspended heartbeat, she was 8 years old again, a girl in foster care clutching a leaf-shaped locket and asking every new face if they were her mother. Rebecca touched her arm lightly, professional but human. "You don't have to go in right away. Take a minute if you need." But Ava shook her head. She'd waited 3 decades already. Inside room 14, the world narrowed. The fluorescent light hummed softly overhead, throwing everything into sharp relief. The thinness of the woman's wrists, the gauze taped across her forehead, the way her chest rose shallowly against the oxygen tube. A small plastic bag of belongings sat on the counter, a torn beige coat, a blood-speckled handkerchief, and a pair of shoes with soles peeling away. Ava stepped closer. Her boots were too loud on the tile, each click an intrusion. She stopped at the bedside. For a moment, she simply looked. The woman's eyelids fluttered. Her lips moved, cracked and dry. "Va." The syllables came out faint, almost weightless, but unmistakable. Ava's hands trembled at her sides. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out the locket. With her thumb, she opened it and held it out so the woman could see. The tiny photograph glinted under the hospital light. The woman's eyes sharpened, focusing through the haze. A tremor passed through her fingers as she lifted a hand, weak but insistent, to touch the pendant. A tear slid down the crease of her cheek. "That was mine," she whispered. "My baby girl. Ava." Ava's breath broke. She dropped to one knee, the locket still between them, and pressed her forehead lightly to the woman's hand. "Mom?" The word came raw, awkward, foreign, and yet it settled into the air as though it had been waiting there all along. Martha Miller, bloodied, exhausted, beaten down by years of silence and one morning of violence, smiled through her tears. "Yes." My Ava. Outside the room, Rebecca closed the door quietly and leaned against the wall. She knew better than to intrude on reunions that bent the arc of entire lives. Down the hall, a news producer argued with a security guard about access. Farther down, Officer Pike from O'Donnell's unit paced with a cell phone pressed tight to his ear. The city was already splitting at the seams, and the fault line ran straight through this room. In here, though, the world was smaller, just a mother, a daughter, and 30 lost years collapsing into the space of a single whispered name. Ava gripped her mother's hand. "No one is going to hurt you again," she said softly, with the resolve of both a daughter and a federal agent. "Not while I have this badge. Not while I have you back." Martha closed her eyes, the corners still wet with tears, and whispered one more word before sleep pulled her under. Home. By Sunday morning, Springfield was no longer just a city with a farmer's market, it had become a headline. Every major outlet from CNN to the Chicago Tribune ran clips of Martha Miller's fall. National talk shows replayed the video, frame by frame, the shove, the crate, the blood. Hashtags stormed across platforms. Hashtag justice for Martha. Hashtag end police abuse. Hashtag hungry not criminal. In coffee shops and diners, strangers argued in raised voices over steaming mugs. What had started as one red recording dot in Ethan's palm was now a bonfire no one could look away from. At the center of the storm, Deputy Chief Patrick O'Donnell locked his office door at Springfield PD headquarters. His desk was cluttered with printouts from the city attorney, draft statements, recommended language like ongoing investigation and unfortunate misunderstanding. His jaw clenched as he scrawled edits in the margins. Too soft, too apologetic, never admit fault. He believed in authority the way others believed in religion, unshakable, unquestioned. Yet for the first time in years, his certainty had cracks. His phone buzzed nonstop with calls from the mayor, the police union, even his own wife asking what on earth he had been thinking. Across town, in the quiet hum of St. Catherine Memorial Hospital, Ava sat at her mother's bedside. Martha was stronger this morning, propped up against pillows, color returning slowly to her cheeks. Her forehead was bandaged neatly, the 4 drips still feeding her veins. Ava had not left all night. She'd pulled a chair close, her blazer draped over its back, her badge lying face down on the table. She looked less like a federal agent and more like a daughter rediscovering the shape of a word she had never dared to say, Mom. When Martha stirred, Ava leaned forward. "How are you feeling?" "Tired," Martha whispered, her voice still thin but steadier than before. "But better, because you're here." She studied her daughter's face, tracing every line like it was both familiar and new. "I never thought I'd see you again." Ava swallowed hard. "I grew up thinking you were gone forever. The shelter told me no one would ever come. But you did. Even if it's years later." Tears welled in Martha's eyes. "I left you to keep you safe. I thought, if I stayed, you'd starve with me. I thought maybe someone would give you more than I ever could." She winced, reaching for Ava's hand. "I was wrong to leave, but I never stopped loving you." Ava clasped her mother's frail fingers, steady and firm. "We've both survived things we shouldn't have. And now we're here. Together. That's what matters." The door creaked open and Detective Carla Main stepped in, a clipboard under one arm. Her eyes softened at the sight of Ava, but her tone carried the weight of her badge. "Agent Hart, we need your statement. And Martha's if she's able. The DA is preparing charges. The city can't ignore this anymore." Martha straightened slightly, as though gathering every ounce of dignity she had left. "I'll speak," she said, her voice quiet but resolute. "I won't be silent this time." By afternoon, the courtroom was standing room only. Wooden pews overflowed with journalists, activists, ordinary townspeople who had seen the video and could no longer remain bystanders. At the front, Judge Leonard Hayes presided, his gavel resting heavy on the bench. On one side, O'Donnell sat in uniform, his face carved from stone but his eyes darting. Beside him, 2 patrol officers, James Pike and Miguel Ruiz, shifted uneasily, their lawyers whispering in hushed tones. Martha entered in a wheelchair, escorted by Ava and Nurse Rebecca. Gasps rippled across the room. She looked fragile, yes, but her chin was lifted, her bandage stark against her pale forehead. The sight of her in that courtroom, an elderly woman injured for daring to ask for food, was more damning than any headline. The prosecutor stood. "Your Honor, this case is not merely about a single incident. It is about power misused, about a citizen humiliated and harmed for no crime but hunger. It is about the silence of a crowd broken only by one young man's courage to record. It is about justice." O'Donnell's attorney countered with practiced cynicism. "My client acted within his duty. The market has rules. Disorder invites danger. This was enforcement, not brutality." Then it was Martha's turn. The bailiff raised his hand for the oath, and she swore, her voice trembling but clear. She recounted it all, the hunger that brought her to the stall, the simple request for a banana, the sudden shove, the world spinning as blood blurred her sight. When her voice faltered, Ava placed a hand on her shoulder, steadying her. The entire courtroom leaned in, each word landing like a stone in water, rippling outward. Finally, Ava was called as a witness. She stood in her bureau suit, tall and unyielding. "I am not just here as a federal agent," she said, her voice resonant, carrying to every corner of the chamber. "I am here as her daughter. For 30 years I thought I had no family. And now the woman who gave me life was thrown to the ground for being hungry. This is not law. This is cruelty. And if we allow it, then every uniform in this country loses its meaning." A hush fell so deep that even the clicking of cameras ceased. Judge Hayes leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "This court recognizes that what stands before us is larger than one officer, one shove, one wound. This is about trust. And trust, once broken, demands accountability." Outside, the courthouse steps swelled with chants. The posters bobbed higher. The city of Springfield was no longer silent. And in that moment, mother and daughter, separated by decades, reunited by truth, became symbols of something larger, the fight to reclaim dignity in the face of power that had forgotten mercy. Monday morning, the sky over Springfield Federal Courthouse was a pale winter blue, but the square outside was burning with energy. Protesters filled the steps and sidewalks, bundled in scarves and coats, holding posters that read "No justice, no peace, Martha is all of us, and protect, don't abuse." News vans lined the street, satellite dishes angled skyward, reporters giving breathless live updates. Drone cameras hovered like steel insects, capturing every angle for evening broadcasts. Inside the courthouse, the air was no less tense. Wooden pews creaked under the weight of spectators, every seat taken by townspeople, activists, students, clergy, and journalists. Some clutched notebooks, others clutched prayer beads. Everyone seemed to know that history was writing itself in this room. At the defense table, Patrick O'Donnell sat rigid, his uniform crisp, medals polished. Yet beneath the shine was a man stripped of certainty. His square jaw clenched and unclenched as if to grind away his own fear. On either side, officers James Pike and Miguel Ruiz shifted nervously. Their lawyers whispered, but the words seemed to bounce off the defendants like rain against stone. On the opposite side, Martha Miller entered in her wheelchair, escorted by Ava Hart and Nurse Rebecca Kim. A ripple swept through the gallery, an audible gasp of sympathy and outrage. Martha's face was pale but composed, her bandaged forehead a stark reminder of the violence everyone had already watched on screens across the country. Ava walked tall beside her, the gleam of her bureau badge clipped to her blazer, a symbol of both authority and filial devotion. Judge Leonard Hayes called the courtroom to order. His voice was deep, steady, meant to cut through the static of emotion. "This hearing will determine not just liability, but the accountability of those entrusted to uphold the law. Let us proceed." The prosecutor, Ellen Marks, rose first. Her tone was sharp, each word a scalpel. "Your Honor, this is not complicated. On video, witnessed by dozens, an elderly woman, hungry, frail, and unarmed, was accused, shoved, and injured by a man sworn to protect. The law is not a weapon to be used against the powerless. It is a shield for them. And when those in uniform forget that, they dishonor every badge. She turned, gesturing toward Martha. The victim does not need embellishment. Her wound speaks. Her silence before the shove, her plea for mercy, the blood on her temple. These are truths no defense can spin away. O'Donnell's lawyer countered with cold precision. Deputy Chief O'Donnell acted within his authority. The market had rules. Petty theft, even under the guise of begging, erodes public order. His response, though regrettable in outcome, was lawful in intent. He adjusted his tie, voice dripping with disdain. The crowd's silence proves there was no perception of brutality until after the fact. Gasps echoed, murmurs rippled. Judge Hayes banged his gavel. Order. Then came the testimonies. First, Ethan Brooks, the fruit vendor. He sat nervously, hands twisting, but his voice grew firmer with each sentence. She didn't steal. I offered it. I saw everything. He shoved her. She hit the crate. I filmed because I knew no one would believe her otherwise. His phone video was played on the courtroom's giant screen. Gasps broke again as the moment replayed, the shove, the fall, the blood. Many lowered their eyes, others stared in angry defiance. Next was Martha herself. The bailiff helped her raise her right hand for the oath. Her voice trembled but carried an undeniable gravity. I asked for food. That is all. I was hungry. I am not ashamed to say it. But I was treated like dirt. Like a criminal. That man looked at me as if my life had no worth. But I am somebody. I am a mother. I am a human being. Her words echoed into silence that felt sacred. Finally, Ava took the stand. Her bureau presence filled the space, but her words were not bureaucratic. They were personal fire. For 30 years I believed I had no family. That I was left behind. And then I learned the woman who gave me life was beaten for being hungry. I stand here as an FBI agent, but also as her daughter. If this court excuses brutality, then every oath of service becomes meaningless. The law is equal, or it is nothing. The courtroom was still, electrified by her voice. Even Judge Hayes' expression softened before he composed himself again. When closing arguments ended, the gavel fell. Judge Hayes' voice thundered. This court will not allow authority to become tyranny. Verdict will be delivered tomorrow morning. The gallery erupted into a roar, chants rising, fists pumping, tears spilling. Outside, the crowd surged louder, chanting Martha's name. And in the quiet of their shared hotel room that night, Ava sat by Martha's bedside. They held hands, their fingers clasped tight, the silence between them fuller than words. Martha whispered, "No matter what they decide tomorrow, I already won. I have you." Ava pressed her forehead to her mother's and whispered back, "And I'll never let you go again." The next morning, the sky over Springfield seemed brighter than it had any right to be. Sunlight poured across the courthouse steps, glinting off the cameras of dozens of news crews camped outside. The crowd was larger than ever, students wrapped in scarves, retirees holding hand-painted signs, pastors, activists, mothers with strollers. Some carried candles still smoldering from a vigil the night before. Their chants rolled like waves across the plaza. Justice for Martha! Justice for all! Inside, the courtroom was packed to the rafters. The air was charged, every cough or shuffle magnified in the tension. The defendants, Patrick O'Donnell, James Pike, and Miguel Ruiz, sat stiffly at their table, uniforms immaculate, but their faces pale. O'Donnell's jaw was set, his eyes shadowed with sleeplessness. The weight of his 30-year career now hung on the edge of a judge's pen. At the opposite table, Martha Miller sat in her wheelchair, bandaged forehead stark beneath the fluorescent lights. Ava Hart stood behind her, a steadying hand on her mother's shoulder. The locket Ava carried glinted faintly against her blouse, as if history itself insisted on being present. Nurse Rebecca Kim sat nearby, silent witness to both cruelty and compassion. Judge Leonard Hayes entered, his black robe swaying. The room rose, then settled. He adjusted his glasses, scanned the papers before him, and began. His voice was deliberate, every word striking the room like a bell. This court has reviewed the testimonies, the video evidence, and the conduct of the officers involved. What happened on that market street was not enforcement of the law. It was humiliation. It was cruelty inflicted upon the vulnerable. It was a betrayal of the badge. He turned toward the defendants. Deputy Chief Patrick O'Donnell, you are hereby found guilty of assault, abuse of authority, and official misconduct. You are sentenced to 3 years in state prison, with immediate removal from duty. Gasps echoed through the chamber. O'Donnell's face strained of color, his lips pressed tight, but no words came. Officers Pike and Ruiz, Hayes continued, you are guilty of dereliction of duty for failing to intervene. You are sentenced to 2 years incarceration, and you are permanently barred from serving in law enforcement again. Silence hung heavy for a beat, then the gallery erupted. Cheers, sobs, applause thundered through the courtroom. Outside, the crowd's roar answered, swelling into a chant that carried down the streets. Justice! Justice! Judge Hayes raised his gavel once more. And let it be recorded that the bravery of citizens, of Ethan Brooks, who filmed when others turned away, of Martha Miller, who spoke her truth despite fear, and of Agent Ava Hart, who stood against injustice even within the ranks of authority, reminds us all, the law belongs not to the powerful, but to the people. Reporters swarmed as Martha and Ava emerged from the courthouse steps, the winter sun gilding their figures. Microphones thrust forward, voices clamoring. Agent Hart, what do you say to the nation today? Mrs. Miller, how do you feel about this verdict? Ava stepped forward, her voice firm yet tender. This is not only my mother's victory. This is for every person who has been silenced, ignored, or shamed for their poverty. Justice does not erase suffering, but it proves that dignity can prevail. Martha lifted her trembling hand, gripping the microphone handed to her. I was hungry, she said simply, her voice carrying with surprising strength. And they called me a thief. But today, I stand not as a victim, but as a mother reunited with her daughter, and as proof that no one is too small to be heard. The crowd erupted in applause, many wiping tears. Weeks later, the story still reverberated across the nation. Talk shows debated the meaning of justice. Universities invited Ava to speak on ethics and law enforcement. Martha, once invisible on a market corner, became a symbol of resilience. Civic groups organized under the banner Justice for Martha, demanding reforms in policing and protections for the vulnerable. In Springfield, a mural appeared on the wall of a downtown building. It showed Martha, hand clasped with Ava, beneath the words, "Dignity is a right." People gathered there each evening, lighting candles. At home, in a modest apartment Ava had moved her into, Martha sat by the window with a cup of tea, her daughter beside her. Outside, children played, their laughter echoing through the street. Martha turned to Ava, eyes glistening but peaceful. "I thought I lost you forever. But God gave me back more than a daughter. He gave me hope." Ava clasped her mother's hand. "And you gave me the strength to fight. For you. For everyone." They sat in silence, watching the sun dip low, the sky painted in streaks of gold and violet. For the first time in decades, both mother and daughter felt whole. And though the world outside still struggled with injustice, for this moment, in this small home in Springfield, justice had found its way back to them. Winter settled over Springfield like a heavy quilt, yet the city felt alive in a way it hadn't in years. The courthouse verdict had not simply ended with prison sentences. It had set something larger in motion. People who had once walked past injustice with lowered eyes were now stopping, speaking, filming, refusing to be silent. Community meetings were packed. Churches opened their halls for discussions about police accountability. On the steps of St. Catherine Memorial Hospital, volunteers brought food every weekend, bananas laid proudly at the center of the table, a quiet act of remembrance for how the story began. In the weeks following the trial, Martha Miller found herself at the center of a movement she never asked for. Reporters came to her apartment, cameras eager to capture the face of the woman who had been shoved for a banana and stood tall in court. At first, she resisted. "I am not a hero," she would say softly. "I am just a mother who was hungry." But the truth was larger than her modesty. For many, Martha embodied the quiet dignity of countless Americans forgotten by the system. Her daughter, Agent Ava Hart, balanced two lives, one as an FBI agent, sworn to duty, and one as a daughter reclaiming lost years. Each morning before heading to the Bureau's field office in Chicago, she made tea for her mother, leaving notes on the kitchen counter. "Don't forget your walk today. I'll call at lunch." The simple routines of care felt as revolutionary as any courtroom speech. One evening, Ava returned home to find Martha sitting at the dining table with a small group of women, widows, single mothers, survivors of eviction. They were sharing stories over tea. Martha looked up and smiled. "I started something, Ava," she said. "We're calling it the Maya Center, for women who need a voice. If I could be heard in court, then others can be heard here." Ava hugged her mother tightly, whispering, "You've turned pain into power." Meanwhile, the fallout within Springfield Police Department was seismic. The union scrambled to regain public trust, while new recruits sat through training seminars that included footage of Martha's case. Officers who had once admired Patrick O'Donnell now avoided his name, as though it were a curse. The mayor announced the formation of a civilian oversight board, and for the first time in decades, residents felt their voices mattered. But O'Donnell himself, confined in a state prison, wrestled with his downfall. Weeks into his sentence, he wrote a letter addressed to Ava. The handwriting was rough, pressed deep into the paper. "I spent my life giving orders, never listening. I believed silence was respect, that fear was control. But the silence in that courtroom, the silence after the video played, was louder than anything I'd ever heard. I don't ask forgiveness. But I needed you to know, your mother's face will haunt me longer than any prison term." Ava read the letter once, folded it, and tucked it into the same tin box that had once held her locket. She neither replied nor destroyed it. She understood something O'Donnell never had: justice was not about revenge, but about truth living in the open. By spring, Martha was stronger. Her hair had grown fuller, her cheeks filled out with health, but her spirit had changed most of all. At the dedication of the Maya Center, she stood before a modest crowd of neighbors, activists, and city officials. Sunlight spilled across her face as she said, "I used to believe silence was safer. That if I didn't speak, I couldn't be hurt. But silence is the biggest wound of all. If we want justice, we must use our voices, even if they tremble." The audience rose to their feet, clapping, some wiping tears. Among them, Ethan Brooks, the young vendor who had filmed it all, stood tall, pride glowing in his eyes. Afterward, he approached Martha with shy awkwardness. I wanted to say, I didn't do much. I just recorded." Martha smiled, her hand warm over his. "You gave me back my voice. That is not little, son. That is everything." That night, Ava and Martha sat on the porch of their apartment, mugs of tea in their hands, the spring air cool and fragrant with blooming lilacs. Children played down the block, their laughter floating through the twilight. For a long while either spoke. Finally, Martha broke the silence. "Ava, I regret the years we lost. But maybe we were meant to find each other again in this way. So the world could see what it means when a daughter fights for her mother, and a mother still has something to teach her child." Ava's eyes shimmered. She leaned her head against Martha's shoulder. "You didn't lose me, Mom. You gave me a reason to be who I am. You taught me strength before I even knew your name." As the last light faded into the night, mother and daughter sat together, the pain of yesterday softened by the certainty of tomorrow. Their story had begun in hunger and humiliation, but it had become something greater, a testament to dignity, courage, and love that no badge, no shove, no silence could ever erase. And in that quiet porch light, Springfield itself seemed to breathe easier, as if justice had finally, if briefly, found a home. Summer came to Springfield with the sound of cicadas buzzing in the trees and church bells tolling faintly in the warm air. The city, still marked by the courtroom battle months earlier, had begun to wear its scars like lessons. Murals bloomed across brick walls downtown. One showed Martha Miller reaching for a banana, her hand clasped by her daughter Ava Hart, beneath the words, "Dignity is a right." Flowers piled at the base, candles flickering at dusk. Strangers paused on their way home from work, bowing their heads as though passing a shrine. Inside their modest apartment, Martha adjusted slowly to her new life. She now walked with a cane, steadier each week, though Ava still hovered protectively at her elbow. Her mornings began with tea and scripture, her afternoons with women at the Maya Center, where she taught them practical things: how to budget, how to cook a meal from almost nothing, how to write a letter that demanded respect instead of begging for it. But most importantly, she listened. When someone listens to your pain, Martha would say, it becomes lighter. For Ava, life had become a tightrope. At the bureau, colleagues treated her differently now. Some admired her courage for standing against corruption. Others whispered that she'd brought politics into law enforcement. She ignored both. Each morning when she clipped her badge to her belt, she reminded herself, this is for Mom. This is for truth. Yet in quiet moments, when the paperwork stacked high and her phone buzzed with new assignments, she felt the old ache. 30 years of absence with her mother were not easily healed. One late afternoon, Ava came home exhausted to find Martha sitting at the table, leafing through a stack of handwritten letters. The sunlight painted her face golden. "What are those?" Ava asked, setting down her bag. Martha looked up with watery eyes. "Letters. From strangers. From women in Detroit, in Tulsa, in small towns I've never heard of. They saw our story. They write to me like I'm their sister, their mother. Some tell me they were shoved, too. Some tell me they went hungry, too. Ava, they trust me." Ava pulled out a chair and sat opposite her. She picked up one envelope, careful not to smudge the ink. "You showed me I don't have to be silent anymore." It read in shaky handwriting. Ava's throat tightened. "You've become a beacon, Mom," she said softly. "More than you realize." Martha smiled, placing her hand over Ava's. "No, child. We've become a beacon. Because you stood with me. Because you said no to silence." Meanwhile, behind prison walls, Patrick O'Donnell wrestled with his new reality. The clang of gates, the stripped-down cell, the humiliation of orange cloth, all of it gnawed at the man who once barked orders that shook markets into silence. He kept mostly to himself, scribbling in a spiral notebook. Rumors spread among inmates that he was writing a memoir, though what he actually wrote were fragments. "The silence was louder than my voice. Fear was not respect. I mistook obedience for justice." One day, he sent another letter to Ava. Short. "I don't expect forgiveness. But I finally understand what it means to be powerless. Your mother showed me that." Ava folded the letter without comment, slipping it back into the tin box. Martha noticed, but said nothing. Some truths Ava knew were meant to be carried, not answered. In early August, the Maya Center held its first public rally in a small park near the courthouse. Folding chairs dotted the grass. A makeshift stage was draped with banners painted by local schoolchildren. Every voice matters. Mothers, students, workers, and elders gathered in the sweltering heat, fanning themselves with cardboard signs. When Martha rolled up to the microphone, silence fell. Her cane leaned against the podium. Ava stood behind her. "I never wanted to be in the spotlight," Martha began, her voice thin but steady. "I only wanted a banana because I was hungry. But hunger is not a crime. Poverty is not shame. And silence is the greatest wound we carry. My daughter found me after 30 years. She fought not just for me, but for all of you. If we can stand together, then no one can be shoved into the dirt again." The applause thundered. Tears streaked faces. Even the police officers stationed at the edge of the park shifted uncomfortably, some lowering their eyes. When Ava stepped forward, her FBI blazer catching the sunlight, the crowd leaned in. "Justice is not a courtroom verdict alone," she declared. "It is the daily work of each of us. My mother taught me that silence is complicity. So today I ask, will you stay silent? Or will you stand with us?" The roar of the crowd answered for them. "Stand with you!" echoed until it shook the park's trees. That evening, as dusk settled over Springfield, Ava and Martha sat on their porch again. Fireflies blinked in the tall grass. Children's laughter floated faintly down the street. Ava laid her head gently on her mother's shoulder. Martha whispered, "I used to think my story ended in shame. But with you, Ava, it has turned into hope. If we could heal, maybe this city can too." Ava smiled, her hand tightening around her mother's. "Then we'll keep fighting, Mom. Together. Until no one is ever silenced again." And in that quiet twilight, as porch lights flicked on up and down the block, Springfield felt transformed, a place where pain had birthed courage, and where a mother and daughter's reunion had become the seed of a revolution. Autumn painted Springfield in amber and crimson. The courthouse square, once a battlefield of chants and news cameras, now hosted farmers selling pumpkins and children chasing one another under falling leaves. Yet beneath the beauty of the season, change still pulsed through the city like a second heartbeat. At the Maya Center, walls once bare now brimmed with posters. "No more silent mothers, every child deserves safety, we are not invisible." Women filled the rooms each evening, domestic workers, retired nurses, waitresses, women who had once believed no one would listen to their stories. Martha sat at the head of the table, her cane propped beside her, listening more than speaking. She had learned that leadership was not about commanding but about creating space. One night, Ethan Brooks arrived carrying a basket of fruit. He was nervous, his cap pulled low, but his smile was genuine. "Thought I'd bring something fresh for the ladies," he said, setting the basket down. Bananas gleamed bright at the top. Martha looked at him with warm eyes. "You don't know what you did that day," she said softly. "You gave me proof. Without you, I'd still be invisible." Ethan shook his head. "I just hit record." "No," Martha corrected. "You broke the silence. That takes more courage than you think." The room applauded him, and Ethan's ears flushed red. That night, he stayed for the meeting, listening to stories of eviction and lost jobs. By the time he left, he was no longer just a fruit vendor, he was a part of something larger. Meanwhile, inside the FBI's Chicago field office, Ava faced new tests. Colleagues whispered about her high-profile courtroom testimony. Some saw her as a hero, others muttered she had crossed the line by standing against local police. One senior agent pulled her aside. "Hart, you've become a symbol. Symbols inspire people, but they also draw enemies. Be careful." Ava nodded but stayed firm. Each weekend, she drove back to Springfield, to her mother and the Maya Center, to the place where her badge felt aligned with her heart. One Friday evening, she found Martha writing letters at the kitchen table. "What are you working on?" Ava asked. Martha looked up, her glasses slipping down her nose. "Invitations. I want women from other towns, Peoria, Decatur, even Chicago, to visit the center. If Springfield can rise, so can they." Ava smiled. "Starting a movement, Mom?" "Not starting," Martha replied. "Continuing. The movement began the day I fell on that street. It just needed voices to carry it." But the shadow of Patrick O'Donnell still lingered. In prison, he kept filling notebook after notebook. Some pages were bitter, railing against the system that had abandoned him. Others were quieter, filled with confessions he'd never spoken aloud. One letter reached Martha through a lawyer. "I see your face every night. You were not my enemy. I was. I wore the badge like armor, but inside I was afraid of losing control, afraid of being seen as weak. I made you pay for my fear. I cannot ask you to forgive me, but I can beg you not to let me be the last lesson. Teach others that silence is deadly, whether it's the silence of a crowd or of a man who never examined his soul." Martha read it once, folded it, and placed it beside Ava's old locket. "People can change," she murmured, "but change doesn't erase harm." Ava, standing behind her, placed a hand on her shoulder. "No," she said, "but maybe it prevents the next harm." As October turned colder, the Maya Center held a candlelight march through downtown. Hundreds gathered, candles glowing like stars fallen onto the pavement. At the front, Martha walked slowly with her cane, Ava steady at her side, Ethan carrying a banner that read, "Silence is complicity." People lined the sidewalks, some joining in as the march passed. Elderly couples wept quietly, teenagers raised their phones to record, police officers stood watching, some with guarded faces, others with eyes lowered in respect. The march ended at the courthouse steps, where months earlier Martha had wheeled in to testify. There she raised her candle high. "We march not just for me," she declared, her voice carrying over the hushed crowd. "We march for every mother, every daughter, every person shoved aside and told to stay silent. Tonight, Springfield proves silence can be broken." The crowd lifted their candles. A sea of light washed across the square, reflected in courthouse windows, brighter than the city's street lamps. Ava looked at her mother, her heart swelling with a pride she could hardly contain. And for the first time since that fateful morning in the market, Martha felt not like a victim of injustice but like a leader of a movement. The air was cold, but Springfield burned with hope. Winter returned to Springfield with snow blanketing the courthouse steps where chants had once echoed. The town looked quiet from the outside, but beneath that snow-laden stillness, something irreversible had taken root. The story of Martha Miller and her daughter Ava Hart had grown beyond the city, spreading across the nation like fire on dry grass. Documentary crews visited Springfield to film the market stall where Martha had fallen, the mural where children now laid flowers, and the Maya Center where women gathered nightly. The story was retold in classrooms, on podcasts, and in town halls across America. "The woman who asked for a banana," headlines called her, though everyone knew her name now. Inside their apartment, life for Martha and Ava had taken on a rhythm of quiet resilience. Every morning, Ava brewed coffee before heading to the Bureau's Chicago office, while Martha watered the potted plants by the window and read the letters still pouring in from strangers. Some were simple notes of thanks. "Because of you, I spoke up at work." Others were heartbreaking confessions. "I stayed silent too long, but your courage gave me a voice." Martha answered each letter slowly, in her shaky handwriting, ending every reply with the same line. "Silence is not safety, speak." But with recognition came new challenges. Some in law enforcement circles still called Ava a traitor. At one conference, a retired chief sneered, "Agents shouldn't air family drama in court." Ava answered without flinching, "Justice is never drama. It's duty." That clip went viral, too, sparking debates on cable news. Despite the scrutiny, Ava kept her compass steady. She spent weekends in Springfield, helping her mother expand the Maya Center. Together, they launched literacy classes, job workshops, and a hotline for women facing abuse. What had begun as one woman's cry for dignity was becoming a statewide network of voices. One evening, snow fell thick over the city as the Maya Center hosted its biggest gathering yet. Over 200 people crammed inside, their coats dripping meltwater, candles glowing in paper cups. On the stage, a banner read, "From silence to strength." Martha, cane in hand, walked slowly to the microphone. Her voice, though aged, carried like a church bell. "I was shoved because I was hungry. I bled because a man mistook power for law. But what shamed me most that day was not his shove, it was the silence of the crowd. And yet one young man chose not to be silent. That is why I stand here today. Not broken but whole. Because silence ended, and voices rose." The audience erupted, applause thundering against the rafters. Ethan, standing at the back with tears in his eyes, lifted his phone again, not to film brutality this time, but to record triumph. Then Ava stepped forward, blazer crisp, candle in hand. "The badge I wear does not make me above the people," she said firmly. "It binds me to them. My mother taught me that if law forgets mercy, it is no longer law. And I promise, as long as I wear this badge, I will never let mercy be forgotten again." The crowd stood, candles lifted high, the room glowing like a constellation of resolve. Weeks later, in their quiet apartment, Ava and Martha sat at the window watching snowflakes drift under the street lamps. A kettle whistled softly in the background. Martha leaned her head against her daughter's shoulder, her eyes moist with both fatigue and peace. "I used to think my story ended in shame," she whispered. "But now, it ends in light." Ava clasped her hand tightly. "No, Mom. It doesn't end. It begins again, every time someone finds courage because of you." They sat together in silence, but it was no longer the silence of fear. It was the silence of healing, of love reclaimed, of justice finally breaking through the frost. And outside, as Springfield slept, candles still flickered at the mural downtown, glowing against the snow, a promise that the voices Martha awakened would never be silenced again. Dear friends, if you enjoyed the video, please give it a like and share it as much as possible. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our Zaku Stories channel. We'll see you in the next video. Stay well, stay safe. Allah Hafiz.